Hi everyone, it's Danny. Okay, my viewer Astrid has asked me if I can make a video with different types of orchids and how long their blooms last. There is quite a difference between orchids. Some of them last longer, some of them don't. Some of them are sequential bloomers, and so the total time of blooming is quite different from one another. I will tell you, based on the orchids that I have, how much they lasted in bloom for me. Of course, there are different factors that contribute to the long lasting of a flower, such as temperature, light quantity, and different factors in the environment, of course. But I will talk about the orchids in their ideal conditions, or as close to ideal as possible. Let's start with Phalaenopsis orchids, which you probably already know, but they're the most long-lasting flowers of them all of the orchid world. I had Phalaenopsis orchids that lasted between 3 months to 6 months and even more. And to make things even better, they can actually branch out from one of the nodes and create new flowers that will last quite a lot of time, or they can continue growth from the tip of the flower spike. Now, if you're lucky and you have good conditions, such as intermediate light, intermediate temperatures, and you care for your orchid regularly with fertilizer and watering and so on, you can actually have a Phalaenopsis in bloom for 1 year or 1 year and a half total time. Not saying here about one specific flower, but with the whole branching and continuing to flower and everything, you can get up to 1 year and a half. And who knows, maybe even more. So they are the most long-lasting flowers of the orchid world. If that's what you're looking for, a Phalaenopsis orchid is ideal for you. Of course, it's not the case every time, but usually a normal flower, one single flower, can last 3 months or even more if external factors do not affect it. Another long-lasting bloom is the Paphiopedilum bloom. Now, each individual flower can last up to 3 months, sometimes 3 months and a half. It depends on external conditions. But as a general rule, Paphiopedilum orchids do last quite a lot of time. There are those Paphiopedilum orchids that are sequential bloomers, which means that when this flower will die, it will start to produce another one. And of course, there are those Paphiopedilums which produce quite a lot of blooms on the top. But as a general rule, each individual flower in good conditions can last up to 3 months and even slightly more. Oncidium orchids are a bit of both worlds. Although individual flowers do not necessarily live that long, maybe 3 weeks or even a bit more, the fact that the Oncidium orchid can create quite a lot of spikes from different pseudobulbs, especially if you have more pseudobulbs, can give you a much longer blooming time. I've had this Oncidium orchid in bloom for 2 months already, simply because it kept producing new flower spikes. And also, the flowers that fell first were the flowers on the bottom of the spike and then the top ones. So that can give me about 1 month of total blooming time per flower spike. I think this is quite a lot, and if you have a big Oncidium orchid, you can have it in bloom for, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 months. Depends on external factors, of course. Some Oncidium orchids can be in bloom for longer than that, and some for shorter than that. So let's discuss a little bit about intergenerics now. There are quite a bit of variations in Oncidium type orchids because they are crossed together with other hybrids or other species, and you can have quite different blooming time. Now, this Wilsonara has been in bloom for about 2 months with its original flowers, but then it started to branch out. Now, intergenerics and Oncidium orchids don't usually branch out, but in rare cases it happens. So I will probably get about 4 months of blooming time, total blooming time, out of this orchid, but this is a special case. There are those hybrids that last quite a lot less. For example, Brassia orchids. Each individual flower can last up to 2 weeks or so, and a total blooming would be about a month. It's not a lot, but if you consider that the orchid might have several pseudobulbs which mature at different times, you can get quite a lot of blooming time. You can get even 3 months. It all depends how many flower spikes you get from your Brassia orchid when they actually bloom individually. If they bloom at different times, slightly different times, a few days or weeks apart, you can get quite a lot of blooming time. But as a general rule, for Brassias, they don't last that long. Each flower can last up to 2 weeks. Dendrobium orchids can last quite a lot of time as well, from 1.5 months to 2 months of total blooming time. This is the Dendrobium Phalaenopsis. The Dendrobium nobile type, although it only blooms once a year, it's quite long-lasting and can last up to 3 months with proper care. I usually get about 2 months or 2 months and a half, depends when the buds opened. Again, if you have buds opening at different times, you can get a slightly larger total lifespan of flowers. But as a general rule, Dendrobium orchids usually last about a month and a half, 2 months if you're lucky, and you have different blooming times up to 3 months. Vanda orchids have quite long-lasting blooms. Well, depends what you understand from long-lasting. If you think about Phalaenopsis, nothing is long-lasting. But Vanda orchids can be in bloom for about 2 months. Now the thing is, none of these orchids will branch out just like Phalaenopsis orchids, nor will they create secondary spikes. But these flowers will last you about 2 months or so, depending on the Vanda orchid, of course, and of course the conditions from outside. Now, Cycopsis orchids are one of those everlasting blooming orchids, not because the flower is lasting way too long. No, the individual flower lasts for about 1 month or so, but because each time a flower drops, there is a new bud forming, and in about 3 weeks to a month, you're gonna have yourself another flower. So in 1 year, most probably you'll have it in bloom half the year, and the other half it will take for the new bud to develop into a flower. This type of flower spikes is said to last quite a few years, so on your Cycopsis orchid, never detach or remove the flower spike after the flower falls, because you'll most probably get a new flower over and over again for a few years. Speaking about sequential bloomers, there are those types of Phalaenopsis orchids, usually the species, which do not produce quite a lot of blooms, and nor do they produce very large blooms. They have tiny flowers, but you're never supposed to cut the flower spike because it can rebloom from the same flower spike for several years, and eventually you will get quite a cluster of flower spikes with flowers. So in the case of species Phalaenopsis, some species at least, you'll get flowers over and over again from the same flower spike. Each flower, again, will last you about a few months, 2 months or 3 months, depends on the conditions. And after that, the orchid, with good care, will start to produce flowers over and over again, and new flower spikes as it grows, and so on. Now, Cattleya orchids are one of those orchids that really don't last that long. They're just so beautiful that it's worth it, but each individual flower can last from 2 weeks to, let's say, in rare cases, 1 month. I do have a Cattleya orchid which lasted for about 3 weeks, each individual flower, and that was a treat, but most likely, in good conditions, each flower will last about 2 weeks up to a month, let's say. There are those Cattleya orchids which don't seem to last at all, and this is because something's wrong in their environment or their root system is not strong enough. Some of them can have bud blast, just like with any other orchid, if something's not right in their environment. But if you have a strong Cattleya orchid and you get a total blooming time of 2 weeks per flower, it's totally normal, and unfortunately Cattleya orchids are known to have very low-lasting or short-lasting flowers. But then again, they're just so beautiful that it's worth having them. They can also bloom a few times a year, so that makes it better. Brassavola orchids, on the other hand, can last quite a lot, up to a month per flower, and the fact that they're fragrant makes it even better. So even though they're quite related, Brassavola orchids, I've noticed, last quite a lot more than your usual Cattleya hybrid or Cattleya orchid. So in any case, compared to Phalaenopsis orchids, they really don't last that long, but you will have about 1 month of very fragrant and beautiful flowers. Maxillaria flowers are not very long-lived either. They can last up to a month in good conditions, but usually from my references I get about 3 weeks per little flower, 2 weeks or 3 weeks depending on the environment. But again, if you have flowers that bloom at different times, you can have a total blooming time much longer than what one flower could last. But as a general rule, each flower doesn't last quite that long. You might get a few weeks, 2-3 weeks out of each flower. Bellaras in general don't have long-lasting blooms either, maybe a few weeks to 1 month and a half, and that's about it on your Bellara. But don't worry, if you have more pseudobulbs, you can have spikes developing and blooming at different times, and you can get more out of your bloom. And anyway, in about 6 months to 9 months, each pseudobulb will mature, and with good care you'll get another flower spike. Miltoniopsis, unfortunately, are not long-lasting blooms, and they're very susceptible to external factors. Usually one flower can last up to a month, and the total blooming time can go to 1 month and a half or so for each flower spike. Now, if by chance the temperatures are too high and the humidity is too low, your flowers will only last a few days, so she's a bit tricky with that. On the other hand, the Nelly Isler orchid lasts a little bit more, let's say about 1 month per flower spike guaranteed, or at least this is how it lasted for me. Being that it's an intergeneric and it has some Oncidium in it, it makes it last a bit more than the Miltoniopsis orchid. But again, it's not a very long blooming time. The total amount that I got from my Nelly Isler was about a month and a half, up to 2 months. It really depended on when the flower spike bloomed, but as a general rule, each flower lasts about 3 weeks or a month. Okay, I hope you found this useful, and if you want to see other videos, don't forget to subscribe. You can leave me your suggestions and questions in a comment below, and I'll try to answer you. And thank you again for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!